Many champions of chaos are unable to withstand the horrific metamorphoses they undergo. Their minds shatter, and their bodies turn inside out and distort under the influence of the warp until the last echoes of humanity leave the swollen mass of bloodied muscles, writhing tentacles, and toothed maws. Thus, chaos spawns arise. Mad creatures living only to kill and feed upon their victims, forgetting their former dreams, glory, and conquests. Followers consider Nurgle a generous god, for he is always ready to bestow extraordinary rewards. This usually manifests as a parasitic infection or as metaphysical diseases. Though tentacles replacing arms, the rough skin of a fly's head, and other grotesque transformations are not surprising. The Death Guard are so insensate to pain that many of them do not realize what changes are occurring to them until it is too late. Such transformations usually happen suddenly and prove to be extremely repulsive. Armor cracks and swells, then bursts apart due to the burgeoning flesh. Skin stretches and bursts, pus erupts outward, toothed maws and various limbs emerge like guts from a corpse. The last vestiges of reason leave the Chaos Worshipper, who can now only mindlessly bellow with multiple mouths, while their yellowed eyes bulge and then disappear again into the quivering flesh. The Death Guard sees such monsters only as cannon fodder, walking barricades, used as a living shield and weapon, capable of delivering incredible destruction before their demise. Among the Death Guard, there is a legend of a champion so revolting that even seasoned veterans froze in horror at the mere sight of him. It is said the appearance, unbearable stench, and pure unfiltered malice of the warrior dubbed Foulspawn prevented anyone from looking upon him and not losing their mind. The Lord of Decay was so proud of his minion that he once bestowed upon him so many gifts that Foulspawn became the embodiment of his name, degenerating into a nightmarish spawn. Typically, chaos spawns perish within hours after the transformation, dying in battle or from their bodies failing to cope with the monstrous mutations. However, Foulspawn did not meet such a fate. He continued to grow and gain unprecedented power. His mouth resembled the entrance to a cave lined with rows of rotten fangs from which he could unleash sticky and strong as rope long tongues. This abomination, spawned from a deranged mind, devoured all life in its path, and with every soul it consumed, its body transformed. Layers of fat stretched the skin to its limits and tore it apart. New tentacles sprouted from every orifice, along with a cluster of wildly spinning eyes and the rotten limbs of insects. It is said that Foulspawn grew until it became a massive, writhing and chirping monster the size of a cargo shuttle, saturated with the energy of the warp and the plague of Nurgle. The Chaos God was extremely pleased with the havoc wrought by Foulspawn. At least so the legend goes. However, Mortarion was enraged by the losses this immense creature had inflicted upon his legion. Its hunger was all-consuming, and it made no distinction between friend and foe. The Primarch could not simply destroy this vile being, dearly beloved by his patron god, nor was he willing to tolerate its rampage. Rumour has it that the Death Lord banished Foulspawn to the fetid wastelands of the Plague Planet to hunt the unfortunate tribes of mortals. Since then, the monster allegedly crawls among the accursed marshes, bloated as if a living mountain. If this is true, woe betides anyone who unwittingly steps into the slime-saturated soil of Foulspawn's hunting grounds. No renegade legion is more favoured by Nurgle than the Death Guard. Swollen with his gifts, and having dedicated themselves entirely to the corruption of the real world, the Plague Marines form the backbone of the 14th Legion and desecrate everything in their path, singing praises to their horrific lord. The Plague Marines are merciless warriors, seemingly ponderous and clumsy at first glance, but in reality, lethally dangerous. Their superhuman anatomy is twisted and subjected to the malevolent influence of Nurgle, allowing them to advance slowly and relentlessly across the battlefield, coordinating fire from their bolters and blasting enemies to pieces with toxic grenades. Their advance is measured and unstoppable. They cannot be overthrown by any weapon save the most powerful. Grotesque and detested, the Plague Marines were once exemplar warriors of the Astartes legions. But during the heresy, they became some of the most monstrous enemies of the Imperium. The bodies of plague marines, decomposed within their armour, feel neither pain nor fatigue, and their flesh has fused with warp-distorted power armour, creating a truly repugnant, unified whole. Projectiles may dent the bodies of plague marines, but usually only slow the traitors down and spray their corrupted blood all around. Those who manage to plunge blades or claws into the Death Guard are lucky if they inflict any damage at all, and not have their weapons stuck amidst the sticky layers of foul fat. Swollen with disease and decay, the Plague Marines constitute the foundation of the Death Guard's forces, whose numbers, unlike many of the traitor legions, have grown over the millennia. Even before the Horus Heresy, Mortarion recognized the necessity of constantly recruiting aggressive warriors. Their tactics of attrition warfare, along with the aggressive environments of the worlds where the Death Guard usually fought, led to heavy losses, which in turn necessitated the swift replenishment of their ranks. After the conquest of the Plague Planet, the Primarch did not alter the doctrine, but simply began global wars to capture gene seed reserves or to collect suitable recruits. If previously the Death Guard perished in battles at roughly the same rate at which Mortarion managed to recruit new members after the fall, they became incredibly difficult to kill. Although the Death Guard often suffers terrible damage in prolonged campaigns, the number of the Legion grows like a virus multiplying in the body of its victim. The bodies of those sworn to Nurgle, the Plague Marines, have long rotted and stink. Oozing spores and necrotic slime corrode armour and burn skin. Despite all the monstrous deformities, they remain formidable warriors. The decaying brains of these heretics do not feel the suffering of their mutilated bodies, making the warriors nearly insensible to pain when wounded. Due to their unholy resilience, Plague Marines prefer close combat, where they can fully utilize their invincibility. They revel in festering wounds and merely laugh at the lasers and bullets from bolters flying at them. Despite all the physical and spiritual decay, the Plague Marines of the Death Guard remain supremely trained superhumans and ideal infantrymen for Mortarion who understand tactics, whose incredible strength and resilience, along with an impressive arsenal of gruesome weapons, allow them to deliver death to the enemy. In addition to conventional weaponry, similar to the Imperial, such as rusty bolters and saliva-splattered plasma guns, Plague Marines also fight with weapons desecrated by the influence of Nurgle. Many carry blight grenades which fill the air with virulent toxins and blinding spores. Against the numerous infantry of the enemy, Plague Marines can employ chemical sprayers, spewing streams of infectious slime. For heavily armoured targets, they counter with weapons that fire armour-piercing projectiles capable of deeply penetrating the target where their fragile glass cores shatter, releasing corrosive iron bane inside bodies and hulls. Even if the enemy manages to impose close combat, Plague Marines merely brush off wounds and then strike back with all sorts of poisoned weapons. Every retaliatory strike of the Plague Marines is delivered with devastating force, and every shot is accurate and lethal. Their bolters, corroded fire-reactive bullets that mow down enemies like a scythe through sheaves. When poison knives bite into enemies, their flesh begins to blacken. Blood coagulates and thickens from the viruses that dwell on the rusty blades. Plague grenades soar into the air and explode, releasing pathogenic spores and acid rain. Crushing bones and pulverizing flesh, Plague Marines advance like a demolition hammer that leisurely picks up speed. They relentlessly back their enemies into crossfires, laughing through vox grills as they unleash Nurgle's wrath on their victims, all the while surrounded by buzzing clouds of suffocating fat flies. The Death Shroud, known as the Pale Harvestmen, the Scythes of Nurgle, and the Eyes of Mortarion, are elite warriors of chaos from the Death Guard. Each one of these plague-ridden heretic Astartes exudes an aura of fear and menace. Such a reputation is well earned. Swollen with unnatural power, the Death Shroud loom over their foes. Rusted gauntlets and writhing tentacles grip massive battle scythes, known as man-reapers, cursed weapons that effortlessly sever heads from necks and limbs from bodies with each sweep. Surrounding the Death Shroud are clouds of plague flies, while vile smog pours from the vents in their armour, choking and blinding their adversaries. The warriors of the Death Shroud demonstrate sublime skill, spinning and striking with a speed that belies their massive, distended figures. Yet their prowess in battle is not the sole source of their fearsomeness. The Death Shroud are Mortarian's chosen champions, his dark emissaries, bearing the authority of their gene-father wherever they tread. They seldom speak, except to relay Mortarian's commands, their voices emerging as a chilling hiss. The Death Shroud engage in combat with an ominous silence, issuing no battle cries and accepting no challenges, embodying the faceless, silent advance of inevitable death as they cast their shadow over their foes. Even before his fall into the Chaos Abyss, Mortarion kept this division of elite bodyguards close, selecting them from resilient warriors who had survived alone where their brethren fell. Upon joining the Death Shroud, these members of the Death Guard were listed in the Legion's archives as deceased. Concealing their identities, they remained ominous, unknown, and formidable figures, wholly devoted to the safety of the Primarch. At any time, within 49 steps of Mortarion, at least 2 Death Shroud Terminators are ready to lay down their lives for him, ever vigilant for any potential threat. Mortarion still keeps the Death Shroud close, though their duties have shifted since the Primarch became a demon. Now the Death Shroud serve as his emissaries, iron gauntlets that can either protect or crush. Typically, the Death Shroud fight alongside Mortarion, but individual warriors become the honorary guard of the Death Guard Lords, Plague Surgeons, and other champions of authority and influence. However, their presence is at best a dubious blessing. Indeed, the Death Shroud will fight fiercely to support their charge, and their skills are always welcomed. Nevertheless, all the while they judge the guarded on behalf of the Primarch. Should the champion succeed at battle's end, the Death Shroud will disappear silently. Should he fail, he faces swift and inevitable retribution from the Death Lord. Blightlord Terminators are an elite formation of shock troops utilized exclusively by the Death Guard. Bound as they are to their Cataphractii warplate, these deadly warriors stalk relentlessly towards the foe's battle lines with their deadly array of virulent weaponry, mowing down the enemy's ranks with contemptuous ease. At last, the Terminators break into a lumbering charge, hefting huge weapons with which to hack and bludgeon the enemy. Flails of corruption entangle weapons and limbs in sizzling, corrosive barbs. Bubotic axes and baleswords tear ragged wounds into which 1,000 poxes seep. By the time the Blightlord Terminators stomp on in search of new victims, nothing remains of their enemies but maggot-riddled corpses. Combining the protective powers of the Cataphractii warplate with the diseased resilience bestowed by Nurgle's gifts, Blightlord Terminators are terrifyingly hard to kill. They take great pride in this fact, advancing contemptuously into the teeth of the fiercest firestorms, mocking their enemies' attempts to lay them low. This arrogance grates upon their Death Guard brothers, but the Blightlords make such exceptional shock troops that it is overlooked or even condoned by their masters. Most Death Guard Vectoriums include at least one band of Blightlord Terminators for breach assaults, boarding actions, and sudden teleport strikes. And it is a rare ship of the Plague Fleets that takes to the tides of the warp without a complement of Blightlords aboard. Due to the amount of time they spend embarked upon diseased warships, Blightlord Terminators are saturated with empiric entropy. This foulness pours off them in waves, rotting flesh and corroding metal in an area around them. Where the Blightlords tread, crawling veins of corruption radiate outwards like spiderwebs of rot and rust. An enemy needs only to be gripped by them in order for these energies to start agonizingly eating them away, while vehicles and fortifications exposed to the Blightlord's malignant presence soon slump and crumble. On many Death Guard warships, Blightlords act as an elite garrison, standing ready to defend the bridge, magazines, or engineerium at a moment's notice. During void battles, Plague Fleet captains bring their ships in close to an enemy vessel, allowing massed formations of Blightlords to teleport directly aboard. Like parasites hatching in the body of a luckless victim, the Death Guard Terminators begin their destructive rampage, bulling their way down narrow corridors and corroding through sealed bulkheads. The Blightlords mercilessly crush the ship's defenders while spreading their corruption throughout its decks. Chaos, cultists, blood, hard labor, tears and sweat. Most inhabitants of the Imperium know nothing else in their lives. Countless individuals are doomed to a brief existence filled with hardship, where the only reward is the absence of punishment and the only salvation is death. Unaware of the high stakes and ignorant of the price of the Imperium's downfall, its ordinary citizens begin to despise their sorry lot. Faith leaves them, and in its place comes something far more gruesome. Chaos cultists nest in the shadows of countless Imperial worlds, among abandoned factories and hidden halls in the sewers, desecrated shrines and ruins of hive worlds. Dispossessed and humiliated, they give themselves over to the forbidden worship of the dark gods, pleading for their aid, strength and material boons. Many understand they are risking everything for fleeting euphoria, but desperation, bitterness or madness convinces them that the gamble is worth it. And so, mortal souls set forth towards damnation. In every world gripped by disease and despair, sects of Nurgle rise. Those who join seek relief from pain and sorrow, but find twisted pride in their afflictions and deformities instead. By the command of the plague preachers and prophets at their head, covered in boils and scabs, cults contaminate water supplies, destroy food stores, release military-grade viruses, and collect all manner of weapons, preparing for rebellion. Often, Imperial authorities eradicate and purge many cells of the followers of the Lord of Decay, but others take their place, breeding and multiplying. When the Death Guard arrives to desecrate a world, they emerge to assist their new masters. Other cults gather from tribes of plague planets or are founded by the Death Guard themselves, from slaves taken in wars against other forces of chaos. Regardless of their origin, the cultists throw themselves at the enemy in a screaming avalanche. Their diseased bodies are numb to pain, and their fevered minds are so twisted that they rush into battle fearlessly. Dozens die under the relentless fire of lasguns or bolters, but the howling stream doesn't stop or pause. Chaos cultists fire from primitive automatics and rusty shotguns. Survivors break into enemy lines brandishing ritual daggers and improvised clubs, thinking only of how to impress their lords and possibly even attract the fleeting attention of Nurgle, and some indeed find the rewards they seek. However, for most Chaos cultists, only a terrible and meaningless death awaits. The givers of life among a handful of Nurgle cults have gained true prominence thanks to the patronage of the Death Guard's Fourth Plague Company. Such cults as the Givers of Life, the Seventh Blessed, and the Sevenfold Conjunction are referred to by the Death Guard as the Gifted and have pervasive roots through entire Imperium subsectors. These cults are used by their Death Guard masters as vectors of spiritual infection and are charged with infiltrating Imperium worlds in the guise of preachers, pilgrims, and minor officials. Upon establishing a foothold, these cultists proceed to spawn new cult cells and initiate the grim task of swaying the Imperial citizenry toward venerating Nurgle, preceding the invasion of their worlds by their Death Guard overlords. Marching in decrepit swarms across the battleground, poxwalkers engulf their foes in a decaying deluge. They stand as the accursed bearers of Nurgle's contagions, metamorphosed into the undying arsenal of the Death Guard and other disciples of the Plague God. Among the myriad pestilences disseminated by the Death Guard and the Chaos cults devoted to Nurgle, none harbours the dread of Nurgle's rot. This quintessential affliction is both a bane to the spirit and flesh, invoking a prolonged and ghastly degeneration in the afflicted that ultimately consumes their soul, leaving their carcass as a festering shell. However, Nurgle's rot merely represents one among the multitude of diseases fermenting within the bowels of the heretic Astartes of the Death Guard and the other adherents of Nurgle, pervading every planet they desecrate. The Destroyer Plague, a curse that beleaguered the gene progeny of Primarch Mortarion and consigned them to Nurgle amidst the Horus heresy, still festers within their putrid vessels. The Zombie Plague, an abomination of unlife for which typhus serves as the prime vector, has evolved into innumerable variants since the Great Rift unfurled at the inception of the era Indomitus. The Weeping Mutterflux, the Slithering Scourge, and myriad others advance ahead of the Death Guard, weaving a concoction of these vile afflictions that spawn the Walking Pox. Those stricken by the Walking Pox witness their bodies decomposing and ceasing function until death claims them. Nevertheless, demise is not the culmination. The victim retains a ghastly cognizance, unlike a zombie, ensnared within their cadaver as it reanimates with a grotesque smile and lumbers forth in quest of the living. Even in death, their flesh undergoes mutation, burgeoning swollen, pulsating tentacles and horn-like protrusions from their skulls, akin to those borne by Nurgle's demonic plague-bearers. Merely the mindless moaning tumult of the poxwalkers suffices to plague the souls of all but the staunchest imperial devotees, inciting widespread outbreaks even within strongholds and metropolises deemed secure. Innumerable souls have been thusly consumed by this malaise, each transforming into another heretical monstrosity, craving slaughter. By the juncture, the Death Guard commenced their assault on a world so blighted they are greeted by an undead legion poised to assist them. While predominantly deployed by the Vectoriums of the Death Guard's first Plague Company, poxwalkers are marshalled as expendable fodder and agents of terror by most Death Guard warbands. In combat, poxwalkers exhibit rudimentary coordination and wield whatever comes to hand as makeshift weaponry. Poxwalkers exhibit a basic level of coordination in combat, employing debris from the battlefield as primitive weapons. Despite their sluggishness and awkward movements, their resilience is beyond human. In significant numbers, these hunched-over mutants are capable of overwhelming enemy defences, engaging in battles of unthinking ferocity, where they gnaw, bludgeon and tear apart those who might have once considered them allies, vehicle and armour assets. The sound of rusted tracks, crushing rubble and bones echoes through the air. Slime-filled engines bellow, expelling foul miasma into the heavens. The very ground seems to recoil at the passage of the Death Guard's armoured columns. These vehicles, clad in pockmarked armour, forcefully break through enemy lines, delivering deadly firepower and warriors deep into the heart of opposition forces. Despite his preference for infantry-based strategies, Mortarion acknowledged the importance of heavy armour in warfare. However, in the years leading up to the Horus Heresy, the tank operators of his legion were predominantly from Terra, and their deliberate annihilation during the treacherous events on Isstvan III was no mere coincidence. Since that dark time, the Death Guard have gradually rebuilt their armoured brigades, commandeering and profaning Space Marine tanks and producing new vehicles from the corroded manufactoria on appropriated Forge worlds. The Death Guard view their tanks as practical tools of war, rather than sacred relics or objects of reverence, favouring infantry-led assaults. Nonetheless, within the Plague Companies, the armoured squadrons of the Death Guard, alongside other vehicular assets, present a formidable presence on the battlefield. Chaos Rhinos. The Chaos Rhino serves as an essential element of the Death Guard's strategy, whether transporting squads to the forefront of battle, safeguarding them through hostile environments, or supporting armoured offensives. These transports, capable of carrying up to 10 warriors in power armour, encase their occupants in a protective shell of armour plated with layers of slime. Since the inception of the Great Crusade, the Rhino armoured personnel carrier has been a cornerstone of the Legionis Astartes, lauded for its reliability, durability, and simplicity in maintenance. The Rhinos deployed by the Death Guard, however, are encrusted with rust, filth and decay, emitting groans and creaks as if on the brink of collapse. Yet appearances are deceiving, for the blessings of Nurgle permeate their structure. Mutated flesh and toxic materials fuse their verdigris-coated armour plates, with layers of decomposing flesh and hordes of burrowing parasites absorbing and mitigating incoming fire. Anyone who has ever witnessed a Death Guard Rhino charging through a barrage of enemy fire to deploy its occupants directly into the fray can testify that these bellicose vehicles possess an unnaturally robust resistance to destruction. Chaos Predator. Thundering into battle with their heavy weaponry aflame, Death Guard Predators offer mobile fire support to the heretic Astartes advancing in their vicinity. Incoming fire bounces off the Predators' swollen hulls, achieving little beyond rupturing pustulant growths and splattering corrosive ooze over adjacent combatants. Driven forcefully into enemy ranks, squadrons of these repugnant battle tanks are capable of annihilating enemy armour, decimating lines of opposing infantry, or taking out vital targets with their concentrated fire. Those Death Guard tasked with operating predators often receive this assignment as a form of punishment, as it is deemed a dishonorable role. Yet there are those who volunteer, enticed by the prospect of harnessing the tank's devastating firepower, though they remain the minority. Regardless, such an assignment is considered a point of no return. Infused with the essence of the warp or seized by demonic entities, these tanks attain a level of sentient awareness, evolving into sullen and envious entities, despising their lowly position. Upon acquiring new crew, they swiftly assimilate them, with biomechanical tendrils and mutated conduits embedding into the bodies of the Plague Marines, binding them permanently to the machinery. As time passes, the crew members are integrated until they become mere organic components within the Predator's shell, their identities merging into the vehicle they pilot. Most Death Guard Plague companies retain at least several squadrons of Predators to serve as an armoured reserve. In contrast, the Second Plague Company deploys numerous such twisted war machines, formulating entire strategies around armoured spearheads, breakthrough assaults, and potent flank manoeuvres designed to obliterate the enemy under their heavy tracks. Chaos Land Raider. Few battle tanks can rival the unmatched strength and exceptional versatility of the Land Raider. Merging the firepower of an entire squadron of lesser vehicles with extraordinarily resilient hull armour, these colossi remain virtually unstoppable on the battlefield. Their adaptability is further augmented by their capability to securely transport even the most heavily armoured warriors into the heart of combat, offloading their passengers to sow destruction, even as they themselves engage in obliterating enemy armour and annihilating infantry units. Although they have endeavoured to accumulate as many Land Raiders as possible over the ages, the Death Guard still face a scarcity of these formidable war machines. Consequently, they are regarded as prestigious emblems within the Traitor Legion, and those lords of the Plague Companies who possess a significant arsenal of Land Raiders exhibit an atypical sense of pride in their hard-earned arsenal. As with all the battle tanks of the Death Guard, their Land Raiders are imbued with the dubious blessings of Nurgle. Their hulls, swarming with parasitic horrors and unnatural plagues, drip with foulness and are crusted over with disgusting growths. Their engines emit a whining and droning reminiscent of vast plague flies, releasing smog into the atmosphere in dense, chemically saturated clouds. The weapons emit a glow charged with leprous energies, surrounded and seething with thrumming masses of bloated insects. Some Land Raiders have become the hosts for powerful demons of Nurgle, displaying malevolent sentience more akin to massive predatory beasts than mere war engines. They have been observed to consume their own crew, instantaneously repair damage sustained on the battlefield, and seek out specific targets that have displayed the audacity to attack them. Knights and Titans. Alongside the phalanxes of battle tanks and monstrous demon engines that regularly fight under their command, the Lords of the Death Guard can also bring to the fray a myriad of other heavily armoured assets and deadly constructs to support their legionaries in battle. The corruption of chaos is insidious, and amidst the filth and horror of war, many regiments of the Astra Militarum have pledged their souls to Nurgle. These traitors bring with them entire divisions of powerful battle tanks and, on occasion, even behemoth super-heavy war engines such as Baneblades and Stormswords. Covered in heretical slogans and adorned with gruesome trophies, these corrupted battle tanks crush the enemies of the Death Guard beneath them. Through torment or madness, the noble knights of the Imperium also fall prey at times to the worship of Nurgle. A knight is a 40-foot-tall bipedal war engine, a swift and deadly harbinger of death, its limbs and shoulders equipped with devastating weapon systems. Each machine is piloted by a single warrior, connected directly to the throne mechanicum at the heart of the knight. If a knight were to transgress against his noble house, he would be exiled as a freeblade, and it is these isolated and tormented souls who most often succumb to the temptations of chaos. Even a single Chaos Knight can decimate an enemy formation, while on the rare occasions entire households fall to chaos. The Death Guard gain a horrifying force of allied war engines capable of obliterating entire armies. Even greater and more terrifying are the corrupted god machines of the traitor Titan legions. Though these towering abominations are rare, The presence of even one can alter the course of a campaign, ranging from the swift and lethal Warhound-class scout titans to the walking fortresses known as warlords. The most enigmatic and arcane allies of the Death Guard are the secretive magi of the Dark Mechanicum. Once disciples of the divine Omnicia, these corrupted tech priests have forsaken their faith in pursuit of forbidden knowledge and dark lore. Those who worship Nurgle have unlocked the secrets of the living rust, viral scrap code, and the myriad machine poxes chronicled in the Engine Flayer tomes. They employ this nefarious knowledge to craft monstrous contraptions of flesh, metal, and demonic energy. Such accursed war machines tread into battle under the power of soul furnaces, nourishing themselves on pestilent cadavers and discharging arcane armaments that annihilate all in their path. Hellbrute. Should a distinguished champion of the heretic Astartes be mortally injured, they might be confined within the armoured sarcophagus of a Hellbrute, thus enabling them to continue the conflict. These biomechanical behemoths encased in armour excel in supporting infantry advances with their punishing barrages and devastating close-quarters arms. Forever ensnared within the bowels of the Hellbrute, the warrior's shell becomes effectively immortal. Nevertheless, the stifling terror and perpetual torment of his confinement inevitably drive him to madness. Hellbrutes devolve into mere savage beasts, howling senselessly as they charge into battle, eager to inflict as much agony upon the foe as possible in the futile hope of dispensing with a fraction of their endless torture before finally meeting destruction. Among the ranks of the Death Guard, Hellbrutes are frequently observed. So stubbornly resilient are the progeny of Mortarion that death is not easily met. Their unnatural virulence sustains even the gravely injured champion long enough for incorporation into a Hellbrute sarcophagus and ensures the success of grafts and stitches. Mortarion's plague surgeons revel perversely in confining rivals and superiors within these infernal mechanical tombs, invoking Nurgle's benedictions of decay and rebirth as they do so. It speaks volumes of the obstinate resolve of the Death Guard that many endure their imprisonment with stoicism and unravel into madness far more slowly than the champions of other traitor legions. When not engaged in conflict, Death Guard Hellbrutes are restrained in the lowest tiers of Plague Fleet vessels, enshrouded in cocoons of writhing tendrils and slick mucus-coated flesh. The machines parasitically siphon the ship's energies, mending their injuries and becoming swollen and potent. By the time they are corralled onto heavy landers and transported to the fray, Death Guard Hellbrutes are suffused with Nurgle's boons. Brimming with unhallowed vigour, they breach the enemy defences like animate battering rams, dispersing airborne diseases and vile afflictions, even as they dismantle their adversaries limb from limb, possessed. Worship of chaos offers many paths to power. Yet a known truth prevails. The faster and easier the route appears, the more perilous it becomes. Some heretic Astartes elect to surrender their forms to possession by warp demons, becoming deliberate vessels for these infernal beings in exchange for the strength they proffer. Amongst the Death Guard, bands of possessed are uncommon. All Plague Marines bear the privilege of hosting Nurgle's gifts within their decaying forms, and, for the majority, this suffices. Yet there are those whose minds, either curdled by faith or enraptured by the sevenfold incantations of the Talimen, surrender themselves to the demons of Nurgle as vessels. When a demon takes possession of a mortal host, it reshapes their flesh as though it were wet clay, crafting their mortal form to its whims. The outcome of this excruciating transformation is heavily dependent on the type of demon carrying out the possession, and in the case of the Death Guard, this role falls exclusively to the servants of Nurgle. Such possessed may find themselves sprouting single horns or antlers from their skulls. Their flesh turns pallid and rotten, akin to that of a corpse, or becomes gas-bloated, coated in slime, or fungal and damp. Insects swarm over and burrow through bodies that are gifted with splintered bone talons, decayed fangs, and chitinous armor plating. Tentacles and vile growths protrude from their putrid torsos, while paralyzing ooze and corrosive pus ooze from their wounds. Some may even develop the bulbous eyes, weakly buzzing wings, or needle-like proboscises of plague flies. Through the symbiosis between the demon and its host, the possessed becomes stronger, more resilient, and far more lethal in combat. The demon can heal its host with surges of empiric energy, while its might, combined with that of the Plague Marine, forges a fearsomely potent entity. However, the cost of such power is steep. Should the host be slain, they are condemned to be banished, alongside their possessor demon, ensnared forever as a plaything in the festering garden of Nurgle within the realm of chaos. Defilers. Defilers are monstrous, crab-like demon engines that lumber into combat on piston-driven legs. Their massive claws click and clack, slicing armoured warriors into bloodied segments and ripping open battle tanks to seize the shrieking crew inside. Their weaponized limbs discharge volleys of shells or jets of flame at the enemy, while the battle cannon integrated within each defiler's torso launches explosive rounds that transform the landscape into a series of blasted craters. The first defilers were forged by the Warpsmiths under the command of Abaddon the Despoiler to bolster his Black Crusades. News of their creation swiftly spread among the traitor legions and renegade warbands, igniting entire campaigns fought over the secrets of their creation. Mortarion, however, did not need to engage in such desperate actions. He simply demanded the necessary hexamechanic scrolls from Abaddon as tribute, and the War Master of Chaos, seeing no benefit in provoking one of the demon primarchs, acquiesced without dispute. A demon engine is a sentient instrument of destruction, a construction of cold iron and intricate mechanisms not driven by plasma or promethium, but animated by the hellish energies of a demon imprisoned within its frame. Such beings seethe with fury at their confinement, yet they are rendered impotent to rebel, their wills ensnared and commandeered by the runic wards inscribed on their mechanical carcasses. The Daimons of Nurgle distinguish themselves by adapting to captivity with considerably more alacrity than the minions of the other ruinous powers. Whether it's due to morose acceptance or the jubilant realization that such an existence permits them the opportunity to unleash untold chaos, a Nurgle demon finds the prospect of confinement within a defiler's husk far more palatable. Once ensconced, the demon's essence pervades the defiler, branding it with Nurgle's indelible sigil. Metal corrodes, lubricants congeal and seep. Luminous slime exudes from the machination's articulations, while its plating is beset with blisters and lesion. A nefarious miasma envelops the Death Guard's defilers, a mixture of decomposed flesh, excrement, and other indefinable putrescence, amidst which swarms of flies hover and swarm. The Death Guard presides over numerous demon engine factories, perpetually producing defilers and other diabolical engines of war. From the plague planet's Blackmance to the Scourge stars, the summoning rites of the Warpsmiths and the Dark Mechanicum are energized by noxious forces, surrounded by the ceaseless chants of cultists day and night. The emergence of the Cicatrix Maledictum has simplified these rituals, enabling the Death Guard to amass vast hordes of defilers with alarming rapidity. The Myphitic Blighthauler is a lighter demon engine propelled into conflict on 3 segmented track systems, offering the Death Guard Traitor Legion substantial fire support as demanded. This peculiar apparatus, evocative of a fleeted bloat drone shorn of its propellers, bears hefty armaments upon its shell, typically integrating a multi-melter with a missile launcher for medium to short-range armor engagement. At the demon engine's front, a solitary ocular lens glares at its adversaries with savage voracity, while beneath it, a maw replete with fangs gnashes and salivates. Should foes venture too near, the Mephitic Blighthauler pounces with lupine ferocity, mauling and consuming them, or it disgorges pestilent bile upon them from the decayed bile spurt nestled among its teeth. The Myphitic Blighthauler's armor, corroded yet robust, and its gelatinous organic components, capable of enduring egregious damage, fortify it further. It is equipped with an additional defensive mechanism, keratinous sprouts emerging from its armored form. As it ingests the detritus and cadaveric residue strewn across the battlefield, the construct processes this degradation within its putrescent bowels. Noxious gases and pestilential vapors accumulate within the demon engine's gastric chambers until, with a moist exhalation, it expels them in dense plumes. The ghastly effluvium of these eldritch vapors is sufficient to incapacitate nearby adversaries through unconsciousness or provoke uncontrollable retching. Simultaneously, the damp, decomposing detritus carried by these clouds thickly pervades the air, shrouding the mephitic blight hauler and any proximate units with a concealing pall of corruption. In this manner, packs of mephitic blight haulers provide rolling smog banks of repugnant cover for the Death Guard's advance, suffusing the air with an indescribable foulness from which the Plague Marines arise with bolters blazing. Most Death Guard commanders employ these demon engines instead of havocs or obliterators, as seen in other sects of the heretic Astartes. The demonic entities of Nurgle that give life to the mephitic blight haulers are as faithful as hounds to their masters, eagerly fulfilling any command bestowed upon them. They possess the speed to match the battle tanks of the Death Guard, and due to their reduced stature and versatile terrain adaptability, they can support the advance of Mortarian's gene offspring through even the most challenging or densely packed environments. When their formidable marksmanship is combined with their capability to enshroud the Death Guard's battle line in protective fumes, it becomes evident why these demon engines are so treasured. While mephitic blight haulers are sometimes deployed individually to aid the Death Guard, they are most frequently seen in groups of 3, a holy figure for Nurgle, often dubbed tri-lobes. These demon engines naturally form bonds with one another, hunting in packs and seeking out vulnerable targets with a lethal instinct similar to that of carrion jackals. These scavenger killers detect the faintest sign of frailty in the air and converge upon a battlefield to feast on the deceased and pursue the weakened. Whether they are darting alongside armoured spearheads or roving through the blazing ruins of cities to bolster the advancing Plague Marines, mephitic blight haulers encircle their enemies, target their most unprotected spots, and then converge to devour the twisted corpses left in the wake of destruction. Fleeted bloat drones, sneaking up close to their victims and dousing them with toxic sludge, are among the most dreadful machines at the disposal of the Death Guard. They are not merely armoured assault flyers, but floating prisons for captured warp entities. The fierce, crazed demons of Nurgle enclosed within unleash their malice with sinister glee upon the enemies of the Plague God. These demons would gladly slaughter the warpsmiths who worship Grandfather Nurgle and imprisoned them, for they delight in the extermination of anything within their reach. It is this rudimentary intelligence that renders the bloat drones so dangerous. Hovering in the air on buzzing turbines and animated by the bound essence of a Nurgle demon, fetid bloat drones advance on their foes like armoured plague flies. Clad in rusty iron plates and swollen with putrefied flesh, they can withstand the most ferocious bombardment and continue their assault undaunted. Many fouetted bloat drones are armed with a pair of plague spitters. As the demon engine hovers above the battlefield, its dangling pipes and tubules voraciously draw in decay and filth to fuel these grotesque weapons. The bloat drone slurps up diseased innards and maggot-thick mud until its putrid flesh is straining and pulsating, refining a hideous cocktail of hyper-concentrated toxic slime. Then, with a disgusting spasm of regurgitation, the drone squirts the resultant soup through its plague spitters, spraying it in great fans across the foe. No cover or defense can protect the target from this lethal rain of filth. Victims find their bodies convulsing and twisting in the grip of 1,000 maladies, rotting and bloating until they collapse into a heap of decaying, highly infectious matter. Many are still screaming when they do. Other bloat drones are equipped for long-range bombardment. Fitted with a heavy blight launcher, these demon engines suck armour-piercing blight shells from their rusting drum magazines and fire them in rippling volleys. This rain of disease-ridden shells can reduce a battle tank to a corroded, collapsing wreck in moments, or bring whole squads of heavily armoured infantry to their knees. The entities that possess fetid bloat drones are more aggressive and spiteful than most demons of Nurgle. Some are so willful that they cannot be entrusted with ranged weaponry at all. Their desire to smash themselves into the enemy ranks all too evident. These rebellious engines are instead fitted with the macabre devices known as flesh mowers. Heavy cylinders of rusted iron blades, flesh mowers thrust out in front of the bloat drone on bulky arms and whir frenetically as it flies into battle. These weapons can be used in thrumming passes through the enemy ranks or more deliberately pressed against resilient targets to rip them apart. Either way, the result is a hideous red spray and a mulched strew of body parts. The mashed remains of fleshmower victims make excellent slop fuel for those bloat drones armed with plague spitters, and so the two variants often form parasitic war packs. Created in festering manufactoria on Nurgle-dominated demon worlds, the cost in blood sacrifice to create these engines is significant, and the binding rituals are hazardous in the extreme. Yet their enduring popularity with the traitor legion's Death Guard lords ensures that fleeted bloat drones are ferried in great numbers to the war zones in which the Death Guard fight, and deployed in swarms that darken the skies. This is especially true in the Vectoriums of the 5th Plague Company, with warbands such as the Sons of the Maggot, the Supperant Sting, and the Smogrot Brotherhood fielding great numbers of fetid bloat drones in varying pack strengths and configurations. These airborne attack waves featured strongly during the opening battles of Mortarion's creeping Doom offensive against Ultramar during the Plague Wars, descending upon the enemy like flies onto a corpse before butchering and feasting upon their victims. Furthermore, some champions of chaos utilized the Blight Drone, another type of flying demonic engines of Nurgle. These mechanical horrors, considered to be a twisted version of the ancient Vultarax Stratos automata, fly high above the battlefield before diving down to annihilate the enemy with precision fire and absorb the oozing corporeal emissions. The demon Primarch Mortarion himself perfected the designs for the first Plagueburst crawlers as a labour of pure spite. The Deathlord sought to create a superlative mobile artillery piece that would outclass any comparative Imperial weapon, thereby demonstrating the Death Guard's superiority over their corpse-worshipping former kin. For many solar months, he locked himself away in the smog-wreathed spires of the Black Manse on the Plague Planet, obsessing endlessly over his foul progeny, dedicating all of his remarkable intellect to the challenge. The resultant demon engines reflect well the values of the nightmarish figure who created them. Plagueburst crawlers are lumbering formidable siege tanks whose massive ram blades, thick armor plating, and demonic energies bestow upon them incredible resilience. Their fearsome Plagueburst mortars boast a parabolic fire arc and terrifying range, while the shells they fire combine high-radius explosives with lethal clouds of corrosive spores to inflict damage comparable to that of Imperial demolisher cannons. The drawback of this weapon is its inability to fire at targets within its minimum range. However, the remainder of the crawler's weaponry is intended to slaughter foes up close, spraying diseased slime and hails of viral shells at any who approach. Mortarion's decision to craft these vehicles into demon engines speaks volumes of his contempt for all living things. Live crew, even Death Guard heretic Astartes, might be injured or slain or suffer an all-too-human error of judgment in battle. By comparison, though great effort is required to bind a demon within each Plagueburst crawler, once installed, the possessor entities tirelessly obey their masters and, by extension, the will of Mortarion. Plagueburst crawlers are not swift vehicles, even when running at full power, yet their advance is as grinding and relentless as the Death Guard themselves. Intended to support infantry offensives, Plagueburst crawlers plough forward like huge mechanical slugs, their mortars firing with metronomic regularity. Shell after shell whistles down to explode amidst the enemy ranks, every shot spreading billowing clouds of lethal spores amidst shockwaves of fire and shrapnel. An area under sustained bombardment from these weapons becomes so saturated with foul spore clouds that it turns hostile to all life. Armour offers scant protection, as the demonic spores gnaw through ventilator grills and enviroseals, corrode the thickest adamantium plating, and wear through rockcrete layer by layer until they seep into even the deepest and most well-protected bunkers. These hideous effects have made the Plagueburst crawler a much-hated weapon of war. Enemies strive to obliterate them at all costs, while even the demons of Nurgle regard them with suspicion. After all, in the wake of the Plagueburst crawler's assault, there exists no possibility for a cycle of rebirth, no matter how vile. For their victims, the only certainty is everlasting death. Plague-bearers are pestilential, bloated creatures riddled with disease who advance in dense ranks to overwhelm the opposition. The rotting bodies of the plague-bearers boast an unnatural resilience, absorbing volleys of explosive bolt shells and intense last blasts without showing signs of weakness. Meanwhile, their entropic plague swords serve as terrifying weapons, their virulent slime capable of rusting metal and decaying flesh upon contact. As relentless as the onset of a terminal illness, the plague-bearers withstand all that their enemies can throw at them before mercilessly bludgeoning them into the ground. It falls upon the plague-bearers to tally each new disease and symptom unleashed by the followers of Nurgle. Driven by an obsessive compulsion to organize, these demons constantly count, attempting to catalogue every fresh outbreak of plague. This monotonous chanting is largely futile, given the ever-shifting nature of chaos, yet it does nothing to deter the plague-bearers, who personify the drive to instill order upon the universe. Unfortunately, the plague-bearers often lose their count during combat, finding themselves standing over their dying enemies, groaning in frustration before beginning their count anew. Nurgle's rot is perhaps the greatest gift the plague god has bestowed upon an ungrateful galaxy. This affliction is utterly incurable and highly contagious, progressing with excruciating slowness, ideal for the Grand Lord of Decay. It gradually transforms the victim's body into a bloated, decaying carcass, while simultaneously corroding the soul to such a degree that the afflicted is left to choose between suicide and embracing the ideals of the grandfather. And when death finally puts an end to their suffering, the diseased realize they have received a true blessing, as their soul is reborn in the realm of Nurgle as an immortal plague-bearer. Sorcerers of the Death Guard frequently summon these demons to the battlefield, either to bolster their ranks or plug gaps in their defense. Sometimes the despair and pestilence spread by the Death Guard are so severe that they thin the veil of reality, allowing plague-bearers to manifest on the battlefield on their own accord. The murmuring demons become a formidable addition to the unstoppable advance of the Death Guard, absorbing enemy fire, sowing terror, and depriving the foe of the will to fight. The warriors of Mortarion view the presence of plague-bearers as a blessing bestowed by Nurgle, yet at the same time they pragmatically deal with demons, willingly allowing them to wear down the enemy and deplete his ammunition until the Death Guard can move in closer to deliver a devastating strike. Nurglings are diminutive plague imps that grow like cankers in the foul innards of the plague god's great unclean ones. They are tiny facsimiles of Nurgle himself, gathering in excitable swarms and spill over their enemies in a biting, scratching tide. The needle-like fangs and clinging claws of the Nurglings pose a sufficient threat to their victims, and as a giggling, merrily gassing crowd, they can bring even a noble space marine to the ground. Saturated with infectious gifts, Nurglings inflict countless tiny wounds that instantly blacken and fester, while the putrid fluids oozing from every crevice blind their victims, poisoning them even further. Under this monstrous onslaught, ordinary soldiers quickly perish, and many great heroes have met their ignoble end under a screaming pile of Nurglings. When the Death Guard Traitor Legion goes to war, infestations of Nurglings appear spontaneously wherever they go. They wriggle through the innards of plague ships like merry little maggots, plopping unexpectedly from ventilation grates and frolicking in the cesspools that collect in the vessel's bowels. On the battlefield, they spill from ammunition crates, cling gleefully to the hulls of advancing tanks, and even burrow through the innards of the plague marines themselves as they march to war. Some attach themselves to individual warriors, following their masters around like faithful pets and attempting to help in any way they can. Many of the Death Guard find these effusive mites a constant annoyance as they filch blight grenades to wave, scramble up armoured limbs to lap at putrid discharge, and mimic bellowed orders in squeaky voices while waving their stubby arms. Yet their presence is also believed to be a sign of Nurgle's favour, for the grandfather does not entrust his squelchsome pretties to just any mortal servant. Their favourite method of attack is to overrun a single individual and bring him down under the sheer mass of their pestilent bodies. For all their mischief, Nurglings prove a surprisingly powerful asset when the fighting rages hot. Masses of them swarm across the battlefield, finding their way into hiding places such as tank wrecks, sewer systems, and collapsed, corpse-choked ruins. As the enemy draws near, the Nurglings erupt from concealment like a repugnant tidal wave, piling atop one another and spilling over their victims to muffle frantic screams and rattling panic fire beneath hundreds of flabby little bodies. Nurglings especially favour the Vectoriums of the Death Guard's 4th Plague Company, gravitating towards those ruled over by Death Guard sorcerers. Warbands such as the Filth-favoured, the Prophets of the Seven, and the bilious ones engage in combat amidst living carpets of Nurglings. Meanwhile, the name of Dulthrox Globagor is celebrated throughout the Death Guard. This malignant plague caster, known as the Father of Mites, is carried into battle on a chattering mountain of adoring Nurglings. Beasts of Nurgle bound into battle with dim-witted joy, not seeking to assault the enemy, but to play with them. Their affection is as lethal as a volley of cannon fire, for the beasts of Nurgle are enormous slug-like abominations whose bloated weight can crush a man beneath their bulk as if he were a spent ration tin. Worse yet, their noisome flesh seethes with lethal contagions, while septic slime drips from every orifice. However, the beasts of Nurgle do not understand this, charging at the enemy like playful puppies yearning for attention. Rushing towards their new friends, these joy-filled monstrosities do not even notice the shots fired at them and leave behind hissing puddles of caustic secretions. Then, with a whip of their tentacle appendages and pseudopods, they enwrap their unwitting toy and draw it as close as possible to lick, cuddle and roll around on the ground together. Bones break, flesh rots, and soon after such play, all that remains of the victim is a foul-smelling mush. Nonetheless, the beasts of Nurgle only feel a brief disappointment that their friends quickly tire of their games. Then their senseless gaze is drawn to something new, shiny and unfortunate. The Death Guard cynically use these simple-minded beasts for breaking through the front line. Thus they herd the beasts towards the enemy as best they can, often baiting the creatures with speeding tanks, which they delight in chasing, or groups of hapless chaos cultists. Should the beasts be torn apart by heavy fire, those shells are at least not falling upon valuable Death Guard warriors. If the beasts of Nurgle successfully breach the enemy lines, the Sons of Mortarion waste no time in exploiting their advantage. Another instance was when the Death Guard deployed beasts of Nurgle at the third battle for Tarren's Pass. With the rise of the Scourge Stars, Death Guard Vectoriums launched assaults on nearby worlds, ensuring that no enemy could disrupt Mortarion's preparations for the invasion of Ultramar in the Plague Wars. On the planet Daxar, the Apostles of Contagion encountered stiff resistance from an Astra Militarum army, a force built around the 56th Cadian Heavy Infantry. The Death Guard managed to drive the guardsmen from the fortifications of Haldian City and chased them across the Sulphur Wastelands. But at Tarren's Pass, the Imperial soldiers dug in and repelled all assaults. Then Death Guard Lord Theluk Poxmore ordered a grand summoning ritual, knowing that the enemies might gather forces for a coordinated counterattack, and that the defenders of planet Daxar still had the will to resist Mortarion's plans. As dark clouds whirled overhead and moons crept backwards across the sky, several hundred beasts of Nurgle were summoned to life by an incantation and dispatched to frolic toward the defence lines of the Imperium. Tens were torn apart by Cadian fire, yet more were hacked and blown to pieces at close range. But the remaining beasts continued to fight regardless, and the exhausted Death Guard followed in their wake. After the barricades were breached, the pass turned red with Imperial blood, and soon after, Daxar fell. Within the mouldering libraries of his Black Manse on the Plague Planet, Mortarion hoards endless treatises and forbidden tomes of numerology, cryptoscience, abhorrent scripture, and arcane conjuring. The foulest of these are the 7 Books of Woe, aberrations whose covers drip with filth and whose pages moan like a bloated corpse when turned. On occasion, Mortarion bestows one of these abhorrent tomes upon a favoured champion, so that they may call upon the incantations within. By reading from a Book of Woe, a worthy champion may tear aside the veil of reality and summon the plague god's demon legions into reality. They can draw the Garden of Nurgle itself into real space and, during cursed stellar conjunctions, even transform planets into befouled hellscapes, worlds of Nurgle manifesting in reality like sores upon a sick man's body. Plague drones. High-ranking plague-bearers riding atop monstrous rot-flies form the demonic airborne cavalry known as plague drones. When they attack, they strike the enemy lines like hard-swung wrecking balls, bowling warriors over with their sheer, stinking bulk. Hairy limbs scrabble, ripping through flesh and cracking bone. Needle proboscises punch through armor joints and eye lenses to inject diseased acids into their victims. Revolting mouthparts gape and suck as they envelop the heads of screaming warriors, slurping them down like sweetmeats. Meanwhile, the demonic riders hack at their victims with plague zerds and hurl infernal death's heads into the foe's ranks to engulf them in billowing clouds of plague spores and sickness. Such an onslaught is enough to break the spirit of even the most well-dug-in opponents, and has been known to turn the flank or break the centre of entire enemy battle lines. Few are aware of this, but in truth, rot flies were once beasts of Nurgle that succumbed to malice and despair. For over thousands of years, even the most cheerful disposition can sour due to the reluctance of potential friends to play even a little. Frustration takes root in these once kind and affectionate creatures like cancer, and bitterness and disappointment only intensify with each failure. If such a doubting pet of Nurgle is slain and banished back to his garden, it burrows into the mud and filth with a submissive sigh, surrendering to sorrow. A thick cloud of Nurgle's fattest flies descends upon the desolate beast, cocooning it against the unfairness of the galaxy, and within this thick pupa, a strange transformation takes hold. A bloated rotfly rips its way free, fully formed and driven by all the hate and cruelty that soured the beast of Nurgle's simple heart. Plague-bearers prize such steeds highly, for in their haste to punish the mortals that once spurned them, rotflies speed into battle at a great pace. The champions ruling the Legion find all manner of uses for the rotfly and plague drone. For instance, they send them to intercept and destroy enemy squads, flanking or scouts, conduct raids on vulnerable enemies, eliminate aerial threats, or breach enemy lines. Plague drones would be reliable and formidable allies if not for the fact that their riders are excessively haughty in accordance with their high stature in the hellish legions of Nurgle. And their mount animals hate all mortals, regardless of their origin. Therefore, those summoning plague drones from the Death Guard can only hope that they will act according to their plans, not do whatever pleases them. With such diverse and powerful gifts, the Death Guard constantly increases its strength like the strongest cancerous tumour. Their native planet has become the womb of their maternal church, the incubator of every divine revelation inscribed on the Flesh Catechism, a generous source and fertile seed, all intended for the universal spread of their faith. They are zealous and obedient adepts, left to the mercy of fate in this cold and indifferent universe. For a long time they worked in solitude, driven only by internal vows and commands so ancient that they had mummified long before the era of the Black Crusade. From the very Primarch, who, rumours have it, spent all his time in his mouldy scriptorium, there was no news. The Legion held together all this time, though slightly worse for wear. Some were tempted to carve their own path to glory. Some heeded the promises of Abaddon the Despoiler. But there were always those who desired to hear the voice of the Primarch through many centuries. But even now, as Mortarion has found his place in the mansion of Grandfather, everything changes. Worlds are painted in the colour of blight, the galaxy transforms, and the taste of contagion on the tongue is slightly different, and the Legion still knows no fatigue. The Legion will be able to rest only when each of the worlds turns into a plague planet, and the bell tone spreads across the galaxy a majestic image of divine decay.